Today, friends, we're going to be talking about the best builds for healing in New World Season 4. Now, the main differences between Season 3, which was the Rise of the Angry Earth expansion, and Season 4 in New World for healers is the introduction of the artifact lifestaff called Vengeance, and also the changes to Amber Gems. So Cut Pristine Amber will now allow a weapon to scale 65% off of focus when socketed into it, which is pretty good. That basically Flail and Void Gauntlet also scale 65% off of focus by default, so you can basically have any weapon do as much damage as a Flail or Void Gauntlet would do just by putting points into focus. We'll cover that later on in the video. The first build that we're going to go into here is a classic healing build that I've been using for a long time now. It's had a few tweaks and changes since I started playing it. I call it the Sage build, but it is a Lifestaff and Void Gauntlet. So kicking things off with the weapon mastery for this build, I opt to go for Sacred Ground, Orb of Protection, and Splash of Light. Splash of Light has been a somewhat like a recent introduction to the build, and it has been nerfed, sadly. It used to be 100 meters, now it's only 25 meters, so you might find it a bit better to go for Beacon, or if you really want to run a single target heal, you could go for Divine Embrace or Light's Embrace. Sacred Ground, however, I feel like is a staple and must be a staple in pretty much all healing builds. It increases incoming healing by 50%, which is so good. It also can take benefit from Fortifying Sacred Ground, which we'll cover in a little bit, and then Orb of Protection. I generally tend to favor this over Keen Beacon, again because the perk that you can put on your weapon or armor, which is called Mending Protection, but also it provides a 20% Fortify, which is basically permanent because it lasts for 10 seconds and the cooldown is only 7 seconds. The same with the heal as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it's basically a constant heal over time and Fortify effect the cooldown is shorter than the actual duration. It just ends up becoming a very staple heal in my build. So I prefer Orb, but if you do want to go for Beacon instead of Orb, I think that is, that is fine. Other passives that you pretty much always want to take with Lifestaff: Bend Light. Every time you dodge, 20% extra healing is huge. Another 20% extra healing if you have a buff, and you can basically always have a buff by taking Sacred Protection, which increases incoming healing. Lifestaff attacks costing no mana. It's it's important. You have to take this if you want to get down here, so but I feel like you should always run this anyway. Blissful Touch, extra healing when a Lifestaff attack passes through an ally is great. Revitalize, cooldown reduction when you do the left clicks, again, just really good. Desperate Speed gives you more cooldown reduction. Intensify is optional, but every now and again I will try and sort of follow up with Heavy, and you can kind of do this sort of damage combo where you do Heavy straight into Orb of Protection after, like that. So boom boom. But again, the Intensify, a little bit, it can be optional. You could switch this out for Protector's Touch or anything else you feel like, but it's still extra healing. Sacred Protection we already covered. The ultimate down here I think is far better than this ultimate over here. I think it's almost never correct to take Magnify. Hopefully one day we're going to see a Lifestaff rework and they'll do something with Magnify because it's pretty stinky. But that is a quick cover of the abilities that I'm using. I want to try and keep this video fairly quick, so we're not going to go over everything else. But basically Splash of Light could be swapped over to Beacon. If you did want to do that, it would look something a little bit like this, and this is a build that I use from time to time. The only problem with this build is it's you can't really get the ultimate over here because we have this 1 point left over. If I put it up here, then I don't get that. It's like, what do we take this point away? You can't get rid of Aegis because it makes Orb of Protection actually good. Without Aegis, it doesn't really do anything unless you fire it straight through your teammates. You can't hit yourself with it either. Knocking 5 seconds off of Beacon seems like a bad trade as well. Reducing your healing by 20% by getting rid of either of these. So that's one of the problems with this side of the build. But it is it's still pretty strong, and this is what I use for a lot of healing in New World, especially if you have an all melee-based comp, because you can just basically drop the heals, and then heal, and then heal, and if you have a bunch of Ooga Booga, Great Sword, Sword and Shield, Spear, Great Axe, which a lot of groups are, you can sort of just stand in the heals with them and do things with the Void Blade. Now let's move over to the Void Blade weapon mastery. There is again a lot of flexibility with what you run on the Void Gauntlet. I think Oblivion is a must-have in my opinion. It's a 15% damage boost. It also applies Weaken to anybody they hit inside of Oblivion, and it gives stamina regen, so just a really solid ability here. Void Blade is usually going to be something that you want to take if you want to get a little bit of damage in there as well, so especially if you're running the all AoE healing build, because you can just put your heals on cooldown. They're healing over time, so you don't really need to have the Lifestaff in your hand, and then you can switch over to the Void Blade as well. But if you want to play a more pure healing build, you could switch out Void Blade for Orb of Decay, or Essence Rupture, or Baleful Tether. Scream is an optional ability here. It often ends up being pretty good, not only because it provides a 30% fortify, which then allows you to go in with Void Blade, because Void Blade gives you a 20% fortify when it activates, plus you get a 30% fortify. Fortify increases your armor, and then you also have another 20% fortify from Orb of Protection. So we've got 20 plus 20 plus 30. Quick maths is 80, I'm pretty sure. So 80% extra armor means that you can actually stay in the thick of it with your melee and really not worry about your health going down, because you've got all the other heals taking over as well. Another big thing about Scream is there is a perk you can put on your weapon or armor called Putrefying Scream, which reduces healing, and this ends up being pretty important in a lot of mutated expeditions and stuff. By the way, I should clarify, this build is generally more aimed at mutated expeditions and healing PvE group content rather than PvP, but often in mutated expeditions you have things like Indomitable, which enemies heal for 40% of the damage they do, or you have nature mutations where enemies drop healing circles on the ground. So Petrifying Scream and consequently Putrefying Scream is a really good way to shut down that healing, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a second. One thing you guys might have noticed with my Void Gauntlet skill tree is we've taken 4 abilities here. The reason behind this is I use Scream when I'm in sort of general, just like fighting through all the mobs, or the trash as it's sometimes called, and then when it comes to a boss fight, Scream really doesn't do much at all. Most bosses don't heal themselves with a few rare exceptions, so I just switch Scream over for Essence Rupture. Essence Rupture, even without any upgrades, gives everybody who hits the target that you put Rupture on 20% lifesteal effectively. Anyone that hits the target, 20% of the damage they've done. Very, very good. Really, really good. Giving your teammates 20% lifesteal is huge. So Scream doesn't really do anything. So that's why we go with these 4 abilities. Rather than needing to respec and be like, hey guys, can you just wait 30 seconds while I respec to in every boss fight, and then going back into mobs and then back to a boss fight, I just do a quick switcheroo like this. So that's why I'm running 4 abilities, and I find it to be pretty effective. So this is my favorite Void Gauntlet skill tree setup. The passives that we take are mostly here for cooldown reduction. There's a lot of crit synergy where when you crit, you lower the cooldown reduction of your abilities, so anything increases your crit chances and stuff like that. Also healing on critical damage done, pretty good as well. Attributes for this build are a little bit variable, but typically the optimal setup that I've been running lately has been 300 focus, 100 constitution, and then actually 200 intelligence. The reason why we go 200 intelligence is because it allows us to do quite a bit of damage, because the main scaling stat for Void Gauntlet is intelligence. 300 focus obviously gives us access to healing. Without focus, our life staff doesn't do any healing. And then 100 constitution keeps us nice and safe, because we get the extra 10% max health, and 100, every point in constitution gives you subsequently more health as well. So something like this is the optimal setup, but there are a few variations you can play with this one. If you want access to more healing, I would typically always stay at 100 con unless you're very confident, but you could drop the intelligence down to 150, bump up to 350 for more healing. You could drop even more intelligence down here, probably going all the way down to 50 to give yourself access to more constitution, going up to 200 constitution. So in my opinion, the limits that you want to be playing between 100 constitution minimum, 200 constitution maximum. It's usually between 300 to 350 focus, no less, no more. More focus doesn't really, you get pretty hefty diminishing returns at that point, so it doesn't really do too much. And then 50 intelligence minimum, just to actually, you know, contribute a little bit extra damage to your team, and then 200 intelligence maximum. So 50 to 200 playing in that range, 300 to 350 playing in that range for focus, and then 100 to 200 playing in that range for constitution. You can kind of be flexible here depending on whether you need to survive more, deal more damage, or do more healing. Now we're going to take a look at the weapons, armor, and jewelry. One thing that I do want to cover is the gems in my gear and also where this stuff comes from. We're going to do a sort of separate section towards the end of the video covering where to pick up certain pieces of gear that we showcase in this build, and we'll also do a separate section for gems later on in the video as well, just to keep things moving through this build fairly quickly. So I'm going to talk about generals when it comes to my gear here, rather than saying you specifically need these perks. I'm just going to talk about perks that you typically want to see on your armor and weapons. But one thing we should do before we go any further is talk about the artifact choice. Obviously, artifacts are a big feature added in Season 3 in the expansion, and there's more coming into Season 4. Nimble Coat is my favorite piece of artifact armor to go for, because it gives you more cooldown reduction. More cooldown reduction, you can use your abilities more often. If you can use your abilities more often, you can heal more often, which is your main responsibility. So I love Nimble Coat. If you can't get your hands on Nimble Coat for whatever reason, featherweight with 2 pieces of heavy armor, and then I think it's 2 pieces of light after that is a good alternative to go for as well, just for extra survivability. But Nimble Coat is the #1 choice in my opinion for healers. Going over to the artifact choice for the life staff of the Void Gauntlet, I went for the artifact Void Gauntlet. And the reason behind that is because our ranged attacks apply rend, so this applies to both weapons with a 1-second cooldown. So while we're just doing left clicks with the life staff to, you know, whether it's you're trying to get some extra healing through Blissful Touch, trying to get some cooldown reduction through Revitalize, or whatever reason, you can also be applying Disintegrate as well. And Disintegrate is the sort of base thing that you get when you attack with the Void Blade. So it says that sort of third paragraph down there, both attacks apply Disintegrate, which does 5% weapon damage per second and reduces target's armor by 10% for 8 seconds. So it's a 10% rend and it stacks up to 3 times. So yeah, providing a ranged rend with your life staff attacks on top of everything else that the life staff ends up being pretty good. Also, the other artifact choice is Vengeance, which I just don't really think is that great for like a main. If your main focus is healing, Vengeance is more for like a damage hybrid. And again, this build focuses on healing first and then doing damage secondary. So the Vengeance doesn't really line up with that in my opinion. So I go for Life Taker instead. But honestly, you could play this build without a artifact, life staff, or void gauntlet. It would still be pretty good as well. I don't play with any artifact jewelry because I don't find any of the artifact jewelry to actually be that good for healers. Blood Drinker for lifesteal doesn't really matter. You could go for it if you wanted to, but one of the problems with artifacts as well is they all have Magnify, and if you come to play more of New World, you realize that Magnify makes it hard to sort of get your stats in the right way because we're not even going to cover it in the video, but Magnify generally pretty awkward, so avoiding it where you can is good, and as a result, trying to stay away from artifact jewelry. Ankh, obviously, it decreases your outgoing healing, which is not really something you want to do as a healer. Endless Thirst, again, just doesn't really provide that many benefits to us as a healer either, so no artifact jewelry. But when it comes to the artifact weapons, I put Putrefying Scream. We covered this in the ability section and why that's important, but it reduces healing, which is really good for nature mutations, really good for Indomitable, and actually pretty good in PvP as well, if you did want to play this build in PvP. And then on Nimble Coat, I went for Elemental Aversion. This is something that you're going to see on a bunch of my pieces of gear here. We have this Elemental Aversion. The other perk that's pretty popular and some people opt to go for in place of Elemental Aversion is Enchanted Ward, which is this perk here. So less damage from light and heavy attacks versus less damage from ranged elemental attacks. This surprisingly does actually work on some abilities as well. So it's hard to specifically show the numbers, but when you have like a Hellfire Circle or the explosion from the enemies when they explode upon death, or you've got those big ice sort of tornadoes that appear from Icebound, or those green little Roombas of death that follow you in nature mutations, Elemental Aversion can kick in and reduce some of the damage you take from those. So this is a great perk that I like to go for. Health is another good one. Just having extra health, it doesn't have any situational requirements. So unlike Elemental Aversion or Enchanted Ward, which only have specific scenarios, health is always active all the time. It's great in PvP, great in PvE. I highly recommend it. And then the other perks that you want to be looking for on your armor are pretty much refreshing and weapon perks. So I've got Purity of Light for that splash of light. I've got Mending Protection for my Aura Protection. And then we've also obviously got Fortifying Sacred Ground. We'll cover why that's on the life staff in a second. But yeah, basically refreshing, get this to the cap. So you want to be 4 out of 4 stacks, no less, no more. Any weapon perks that you enjoy, so Keen Beacon, Purity of Light, Refreshing Divine Embrace, Mending Protection. And then I think like the third most important thing or whatever is to go for Elemental Aversion. And maybe a little bit of thrust or slash conditioning can be handy as well. So I'm just going to quickly hover over the gear here. But like I say, going on like a piece-by-piece breakdown, I think would just make this video unnecessarily long. The stats for the gear, by the way, it's usually going to be either focus or focus or intelligence. I think putting too much constitution in your build can be a little bit risky because then, you know, if you want to play with a lower amount of con, if you are feeling pretty aggressive or something like that, if you want to play 50 con or even 100 con, if you have like 1, 2, 3 pieces of gear with constitution and your amulet with constitution, suddenly it becomes like impossible to play anything less than, you know, 120 con or whatever. So I typically look for intelligence or focus pieces on my gear. Moving over to my life staff, I think 2 perks that are pretty much mandatory in the life staff are Blessed and Refreshing Move. If you prefer Savior, you can go for Savior. I just think Blessed is a little bit more consistent. It's 12% always active extra healing versus Savior, which is 20% when somebody's below 50, so it's a bit more situational. Refreshing Move is a must-have perk because you already have access to Refreshing Move, but you can just make it stronger. So Revitalize, when you're just doing left clicks, they also pass through your teammates and heal them. So just doing this, actually a really good way to lower your cooldowns and something to do that if you just need to provide some extra healing, honestly, just left clicking is the best thing to do, and Refreshing Move kicks in on that. And then the third perk that you're going to be looking for in your life staff is typically a weapon perk. So this is Fortifying Sacred Ground, Mending Protection, Purity of Light. I prefer to go for Fortifying Sacred Ground myself because I often find that my damage players are quite squishy. They die pretty fast, because usually, you know, it's like the popular thing for damage players to do is to go as low as they can in Constitution, so anything will one-shot them. But you can sort of mitigate that a little bit by providing more armor through Fortify. So we get a 27% Fortify from Fortifying Sacred Ground, and then we also get a further, 17%, another 20% there, for a total of 37% Fortify. It might not save them, but I think it's often, you know, the better perk to go for compared to anything else. But I do also believe that Mending Protection on the Life Staff is a close, very close second as well. So you do want to make sure that you have both of these perks, in my opinion. Which one you put on the Life Staff is down to personal preference, but for me, Fortifying Sacred Ground, just for a little bit extra armor, makes it less likely a team are going to get one-shot. When it comes to the jewelry perks, the Amulet is interchangeable. I usually go for Health. Divine is a good option here as well. Stamina Recovery is a great option, and then the third perk is going to be some form of protection. So Flame Protection if I'm doing a Fire mutation, Nature Protection if I'm doing a Nature mutation, Void Protection, so on and so forth. Ring choice, we've got Hearty, Healing Breeze, and Sacred. I think these are the best 3 perks to go on the ring. This is a best in slot healer ring. You could make a few changes, but honestly, I think either Purifying or anything like that, these are the best 3 perks, hands down, to put on the ring. And then we have the Earring. Interestingly enough, I actually like to take Refreshing on the Earring to free up a perk on my armor, so I don't really find that many of the Earring perks are really that exciting. Healthy Toast, Refreshing Toast, usually something I want to be looking for, and then a Refreshing third perk. One thing that you can fall into the trap of is to take Regenerating, but to my understanding, Regenerating is constantly healing you all the time, and it is modified by the amount of extra healing that you get from Sacred Protection as well, so you're actually healing yourself even more, which can then allow you to generate more threat. And, you know, sometimes if you're just running through a corridor with a bunch of mobs, the tank will lose aggro because they're not attacking them. You're just moving from A to B. But because you've got that passive healing going, you'll actually, you know, trigger the aggro through regenerating. So sometimes a perk that you want to avoid, you're going to play with that in your own preference. But for me, Refreshing Toast, Healthy Toast, and Refreshing, which you can just see by the camera here, is usually my go-to perks. Lastly, Heart Rune choice for the Sage build. We've got the Brutal Heart Rune of Grasping Vines. Stone Form, I think, is also a great option to go for as well, which we can probably find in one of our builds here. This is a bit more defensive. Brutal Heart Rune of Grasping Vines, a bit more aggressive. You could also go for Firestorm as well. There's quite a few options here, but I would typically say between one of these two is what I'm running like 90% of the time. Other parts of this build that we didn't talk about right now is gems, consumables, and actually where to find the different pieces of gear. We're going to put those in at the end of the video, but now we're going to move over to our other build, which is the Cleric build. I've called it Cleric Big DPS, but these days this is just my Cleric build, and this is with the new addition of the Flail weapon, and it will also be running Vengeance as well. So again, we're recording this in Season 3 to sort of get ahead of the curve, but Vengeance will be my takeover here, and the perk upgrade that we'll be going for on Vengeance is Blessed. Vengeance says that every time we heal a teammate, we basically get some extra damage. So every time you heal somebody, you get a little bit of extra DPS, going up to a 20% damage increase. It turns out this combined with the Flail and then using the Powerful Eruption perk and the stats that we run, this is actually surprisingly a very aggressive build in terms of damage, but you also have access to very competitive healing as well. This is more of a build that I play in PvP, but I do find it to be very fun. So if you're looking for a healer build where you're not necessarily just a healer, though, you can actually turn the tables on them and get really aggressive, this is a build that I recommend going for. Less PvE orientated and less healer orientated than the Sage build. So if you're doing mutated expeditions, the Sage build is probably the go-to. But if you want to solo, have a bit of fun, or maybe jump into a bit of PvP and have the ability to carry to some extent, then this is what I recommend the Cleric build for. So weapon mastery wise for this build, the foundation is going to look a little bit something like this. It's a bit weird because I actually like to take the Keen Beacon for the movement speed increase, because we can like zoom in and out of combat faster. And then you have the choice to go for a single target heal. You can go for Divine Embrace, which I think gives you a little bit more access to raw healing. Also allows you to pick up Divine Blessing. So if you want to focus more on the healing side, I think Divine Embrace is the way to go for. Alternatively, you can get a little bit wild over here and take Light's Embrace, which gives you a bit of extra stamina. And you can also put the Accelerating Light's Embrace perk onto your armor, which gives you a bit of movement speed, so you can double up on that sort of zooming in and out of the combat. Maybe more appropriate for Outpost Rush if you want to go for the sort of guerrilla warfare, back cap sort of tactic. Or if you just want to play something a little bit different, I think this is good to go for. If you are going to go for Light's Embrace, it gives you more healing depending on every life staff buff that you have on the target. So trying to maximize the amount of life staff buffs that you have, which includes Beacon, the movement speed from Beacon, the Fortify from Protector's Touch, Spirits United, and also Sacred Protection over here. You can actually stack up a pretty impressive heal. I mean, it's 25 or 20% extra for each buff, so that's 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120 with Sacred Ground. So this can actually be a massive heal, but you kind of have to get the stars to align in that regard. The final point that you could go for here, it could be Glowing Focus for buffs lasting longer to get some more advantage of that haste. You could go for Intensify, you could go for Enchanted Justice or Mending Touch or anything like that. So two different ways you can play the build. It's basically Divine Embrace for a bigger healing sort of potential, or Light's Embrace for a little bit more, maybe more of a meme, but also a bit more aggression as well. Looking in something like this one here. On the Flail Mastery, this has been my go-to of choice. I like to take Smite because it actually does quite a lot of damage. Like, it surprisingly hits very hard with Smite. Eruption is another way to deal a lot of damage, and then Trip is a way to sort of secure a kill or potentially peel for yourself or your teammates. If you're getting pressured down by a spear, or if you are playing this in PvE, you can trip up a big group of enemies just to stop any incoming damage for a little bit. We go for the Better Together passive because it's just a little bit of extra healing, and then we take other perks over here. All of the passive that sort of seem appropriate for me is what we run over here as well. So damage reduction, a bit of extra stamina, putting some more weaken onto the teammates, applying exhaust, stuff like that. So it is kind of interchangeable what you want to play here. Arcane Vortex is a really good ability, but like I say, there's more PvP orientated. So I think Trip, Eruption, and Smite, because we do want to be able to kill our enemy, and we can do it surprisingly often with this combination of weapon mastery here. When it comes to attributes for this build, I have been running 100 strength to give the flail a little bit extra damage, because the flail scales 90% off of strength. Now, I have thought about what about putting the Amber Gem into the flail, but the flail already scales, I think it's 60 or 65% off of focus, so putting an Amber Gem in it doesn't really do anything because it already scales that much of a focus anyway. So it actually is a net negative, because then you don't get any benefit from putting points into strength other than the ATBs or whatever, these little circles. So yeah, no Amber Gem. Instead, just 100 points into strength for some damage. We go to 350 focus for some big healing, and it also contributes to damage for our flail. And then very importantly, from the PvP standpoint, we want to be playing 150 constitution minimum, because we get critical damage taken. So this is basically 2 stacks of the good old-fashioned resilient from back in the day. So and then I'll probably put the remaining points into constitution for some extra survivability. So this is the way that I've been playing it so far, dropping down to 300 focus to go up to 200 con, dropping down to 300 focus to go to 150 strength for more damage, are all kind of options, but this has been the optimal way for stat setup for me. Next up, we're going to take a look at the gear. So the artifacts of choice, I've got Featherweight over here. Featherweight is an interesting one because it's a chest that doesn't weigh anything, so if I take it off and then put it back on, you can see my character's equip weight doesn't change at all, and this allows you're basically naked on your chest, so you can get away with you know, having a shield, you can get away with having some medium pieces of gear for some extra survivability. It's pretty solid. You could instead run a different artifact piece of armor. You could go for the Tumbler Feet Wraps and then go everything else light. You could go for, oh, you couldn't do Nimble Coat because then you wouldn't be able to have a round shield. It is important to stay in the light equip load because it gives you the extra outgoing healing. I think any sort of build that is healer, with the exception of something like a Paladin, does want to be in that light equip load for the extra outgoing healing. Also, interestingly here, we have a round shield as well. I think it's worth to address the elephant in the room. Some people think I'm playing, if I'm playing flail, it's either no shield or kite shield. I know kite shield has become very, very popular with the flail, especially from the PvP standpoint. Probably gonna have some people talking about this in the comments, because Smite applies a stagger, which is a pretty big deal, staggering the enemy. It also gives you some extra armor, but I actually like the round shield for the surprising burst of damage. Maybe we're going to be able to overlay a bit of footage while we're talking about this build here, but round shield also gives you access to aggressive perks. This Soul Shroud round shield in particular has Keen Vicious, Keenly Empowered. It's pretty low gear score, but I am going to bump this up at some point in the Gypsum Kiln. But yeah, these perks, Keen Vicious, Keenly Empowered, then do apply to the flail as well. So you can have like 3 aggressive perks here and another 3 aggressive perks here, which really can ramp up the damage. To maximize the amount of armor that we have down here, we've also gone for some medium boots, medium legs, and a medium helmet. These are sort of interchangeable. You want to keep the legs at medium, but you could go for some medium gloves and then light boots. The perks that I'm looking for here, Health Refreshing Elemental Aversion or Health Refreshing Enchanted Ward is going to be solid. Featherweight we upgraded with the health perk as well. Arcane Harnessing is optional. You can go for here for a little bit extra arcane damage if you want. I also have it on the boots as well because this, again, the flail does do a surprising amount of arcane damage, but making sure the refreshing cap so you can use your heals and abilities more often. health so you can stay alive, and then like I say, the elemental aversion or enchanted ward pretty good in there as well. One thing this build is missing is sort of weapon perks, so we don't actually have the fortifying sacred ground and the mending protection in here. Again, it's less of a healer and more of a damage dealer, so it's not super important that you go for that. You're gonna get your keen beacon from your vengeance here. Vengeance does have the problem in that it doesn't have a gem slot in it, and when we played with it on the test server, you couldn't put a gem slot in it, so I think the next best perk to put in it is Blessed. So putting Blessed in your Vengeance will be the go-to there. And then on the Flail, I've been opting to go for Powerful Eruption, Plague Crits, and then I think the ideal third perk would either be Attunement or Enchanted, just again for some more damage. Opal Gem to give more damage I think is a great option. Diamond Gem could also work, but you have to be at full health for that to kick in. So I've just been going for the Opal so we can dodge. When it comes to the jewelry, Ankh surprisingly is something that I've been running. Even though your outgoing healing is reduced, your incoming healing is actually significantly boosted. So when you're standing your sacred ground and you have Ankh active, you can heal yourself for like a lot. The amount that your outgoing healing is reduced versus your incoming healing, the incoming healing modifier is stronger than the outgoing healing because of some weird way that New World does math. So this does actually be a net positive for healing yourself. But if you do want to heal other people, then maybe just taking a health, stamina recovery, some sort of protection amulet might be better. We have the same ring that we use in all our healer builds, which is Hearty, Sacred Healing Breeze, and then we have a Healthy Toast, Healing Heart, and Regenerating Earring just to give us more access to healing, because again, we're looking at PvP here. In the Heart Rune choice, I've got the Bile Bomb Heart Rune here to reduce healing if I go up against other healers. I think the Grasping Vines or Firestorm or even Detonate could be good here as well. But that is a quick look at the sort of Cleric build there as well. Now, one thing I do want to say before we go any further in this video is both of these builds are available on our website. That is playerversusnewworld.net or pvnw.net. So I'll put a link to this website in the description down below. This is a build website that we've been working on. So the Cleric build you can find in here. We also have a breakdown of the attributes, the abilities. We even sort of go over the playstyle and the intro to the build as well. So if you want to take a little bit more of a look at the deep dive, you don't want to be pausing this video to take a look at what's going on, we do have the sort of, outline of the build here as well. The same with the Sage build. So if you're interested in the first build that we talked about, both of these are here as well. Now, as promised, the last thing that we're going to talk about in the video is the gear and where to acquire it. So we'll start off with the life staff. That is a pretty important aspect of any healer build. Without a life staff, it's very hard to be a healer. Life staff options, as we talked about, the base perks that I'm typically looking for on a life staff to modify off of and to sort of upgrade it, the Gypsum Kiln, are Blessed and Refreshing Move. And it turns out there are a few life staffs with exactly these two perks on them. So we have the Corrupt Progenitor life staff, which is probably one of the easiest ones to get. This is Blessed and Refreshing Move, and it's available from enemies in the Shattered Mountain and sort of Merc God area. So going to kill any of these enemies, eventually, after enough effort, you will receive the Corrupt Progenitor life staff, and then by taking that to the Gypsum Kiln, we're pretty close to one in Brimstone Sands. As long as you have it in your inventory, you can upgrade it and choose the third perk. So you can then take the, if we have one in our inventory, so here's one that I farmed out a little while ago. We can just take this to the Gypsum Kiln, which is like this blue well thing. As long as it's in your inventory, not equipped to your character or any gear sets, you'll be able to scroll down to the bottom section here, and you'll find this sort of named item crafting, and you can take it and slap a third perk on it. So if we wanted it to be Blessed, Refreshing Move, and then Fortifying Sacred Ground, we would just need the appropriate craft mod, which is the Star Metal Lifestaff Charm, and then you need these materials here as well. There are a few other ways you can do this. The way that I initially did this was to make the Fire of Life. So the Fire of Life has it has Blessed and Fortifying Sacred Ground, so you could craft one of these. If you don't get lucky and get the third perk, Refreshing Move, again, you could just take the Fire of Life in your inventory, go down to the named item section, and then add the sort of perk onto it. So that's one way that you can go about acquiring a pretty good life staff. It does require a little bit of grinding, but once you're set, you're set. You have that life staff. Vengeance, the artifact life staff, we're not quite sure where that comes from yet. Nimble Coat, which is the artifact chest piece that I wear in my Sage build, that comes from the PvP rewards track, so you just got to grind out a bit of PvP. You can see it here in checkpoint 3. As long as this number says 20 or higher, you can get the Nimble Coat. Featherweight, which is the other artifact that we're using here, this comes from a Birdman. I think his name is Nermer. I think that's right, and you can find him right here in Fungal Ridge. You have to go down a sort of twisting, or go up a twisting stairway. You can find the bird boy over there, who eventually will drop featherweight after enough persistence. Ankh is another artifact that we covered. This also comes from the PvP rewards track, same sort of way that you get Nimble Coat. It could be in checkpoint 3 as long as this number says 20 or higher. When it comes to PvP rewards track, one of the best ways to grind that out in Season 4 is going to be Outpost Rush. So just queuing for Outpost Rush, maybe playing the Cleric build while you do it for a little bit of fun is going to be one of the fastest ways to progress through that. Life Taker, the artifact Void Gauntlet, comes from a monkey called Pugnacious Perutu, which is located in the Isle of Zervan. He's up on top of a floating rock, so there's a bit of a jumping puzzle to get through here, and I'll link a video up in the top right if you want to check out how to unlock the Isle of Zervan if you've never been there before. This is something that you will need a group for in order to take down Pugnacious Perutu, though. He's pretty difficult to solo, but that's where you can get the Life Taker Void Gauntlet artifact. Vengeance, as I covered, we're not quite sure where Vengeance comes from yet. My suspicion is it's going to be the PvP rewards track or something like that, but I'll update in the comments where we know where Vengeance comes from. And then in terms of other pieces of gear, it's usually going to be a method of crafting using chromatic seals or buying stuff off the trading post, or grinding dungeons. So most of my gear, especially this incredible stuff here that has health, refreshing, elemental aversion, is pretty solid. On the Sage build, we had a few other pieces like this as well with health, voracious blade, elemental aversion. A lot of this stuff has come from mutated Lazarus, so getting yourself into Lazarus instrumentality when it's mutated is a great source of gear. Actually, it has a really good loot table, but so do a few other dungeons as well. The flail, like a good flail that you can make, is called Heavy Chain, I want to say. And Heavy Chain, I think, has, yeah, Powerful Eruption, Keenly Jagged, which is going to be a great start to your flail DPS as well. So you can get this from Barnacles and Black Powder, or you can get it with Materia. One thing that's also worth mentioning, if you are new to New World or just coming back in Season 4, taking a break for a long time, you can complete your Season Pass. This is the Season 3 Season Pass, but in Season 4, there is going to be these Materia chests again. They're usually on the free track up at the top row from like level 70 onwards. You open up these boxes, you get Materia, and then you can take Materia to the Gypsum Kiln and make items from here as well. We did a whole separate video on like the best items to make from the Gypsum Kiln, so if you want to take a look at that, it'll be linked in the description down below or up in the top right. And then lastly, the other thing I wanted to cover is gem choice. Now, with the Cleric build, this is more PvP orientated, and on my server, and from what I experienced, PvP right now consists of spears and bows and blunderbuss. Spears and bows do a lot of thrust damage, so taking emerald gems has been pretty good for the thrust damage absorption. Blunderbuss, also fire staff is very important, so rubies for fire damage reduction. Basically, the gems are kind of situational. It depends what you're going against. If you don't really know what you're going to be playing against, I think diamonds or opal gems or onyx gems, just for straight up physical or elemental damage reduction, kind of catch everything. But it is often worth speccing a particular type of gem into your gear if you know what you're going into. So the Sage build that we showed earlier in the video, I've been playing the Sage build in mutated Lazarus Instrumentality to grind out some of that gear, and Lazarus Instrumentality right now has a fire mutation running, so I know that there's a lot of fire damage incoming, and as a result we've put a lot of ruby gems into my armor. But if I was going to play this Sage build next week and I was doing Starstone Barrows with a nature mutation, I would be changing my gems over to Amber. This is another topic that we also have on Player vs. New World as well. If you go to the gameplay section, then you go to mutation damage, we do have a gem recommendation depending on what sort of mutation it is. So if you want to learn a little bit more about mutations and how to spec against those for gems, like I say, check out the link in the description down below. But I feel at this point, friends, this video has gone long enough. I still think there's a lot of things that we didn't cover. So all I can say, friends, if you have any further questions, leave them in the comments down below, or even better, hop into the stream. I'm streaming New World almost every single day. There's going to be a brand new set of Twitch drops, so you can get skins by watching me stream New World. You can also earn skins in the game at the same time, so it's going to be a great deal, and you can ask any further questions about the build. So if there is anything that I didn't cover, and I often make these videos and forget something really important, hopefully I covered everything this time, though. I tried to be quite thorough, but also concise at the same time. Like I say, if you guys enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing if you want to see more. We're going to be talking about the best tank builds and the best DPS builds of Season 4 soon as well. So yeah, subscribe if you want to see those. Hop into the stream if you got any further questions, and I will catch you guys all in the next video.